Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to the host for tonight, Markus Raupach. Thank you, Markus.
Thank you very much, Brett. Maybe you stop the screen sharing for a moment. You're still sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm still sharing it, am I? Okay, let me stop that.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you very much and welcome to all of you to our workshop today. It's all about Berliner Weisse. So an interesting beer style, a beer style with a lot of variations, let's say it like this. And to be honest, at the moment in Berlin, we only have two breweries producing the real stuff. So we will talk about all that in a moment. But of course, when we talk about beer, we should have one. So I invite everybody who has one just to pour in your beer. I will start with one of the two. So this one is Marlene from Schneeeule. I will talk about that also in about half an hour. And Ulrike, the brewer, is also joining us then, and we can talk with her about what she's doing and what is her history and all about her. And the beer I will start now is this one. This is a Berliner Weisse brewed at the Lemke brewery. We'll also talk about that. And it's a special one. It's my favorite from this brewery. It's the one with raspberries, with real raspberries. So I try to pour that. And of course, you need a special glass for a Berliner Weisse. Also something we will be talking about in a moment. And here we go. And so cheers to the start of this workshop. All right. So let's have a look at what we are doing now. Here we go. Perfect. Maybe as a first step, maybe you write in the chat your idea of what is a Berliner Weisse. So maybe just the main thing. Is it more like this or more like this? So just let me know a little bit, write in the chat what you think. What is the most typical thing of a Berliner Weisse? Let's see, so I see sour and fresh, dry, light sour, sour and fruits, mixed fermentation, yogurt, champagne of the north, very perfect, okay. Refreshing, very important point. Wheat beer, also very important. And refreshing again. So, okay, let's start. We're talking about Berliner Weisse. Maybe a few words about me, just that you know who is talking to you. If I find my screen again, here we go. Yeah. So my name is Markus Raupach. I come from Bamberg. I'm the founder of the German Beer Academy. Also, I'm the host of a podcast. The podcast is called Beer Talk. And I also did talks with all the Berliner Weisse brewers. So if you're interested, have a look at the podcast website and you can listen to them. And all of the podcasts are also transcribed, so you can also read through, which is maybe interesting, especially if you want to brew it yourselves, because they talk a lot about what they are doing and why and how. Yes, I've written a lot of books about beer and especially, of course, also about the Berlin beer. Maybe I make a short break here because maybe the two most important books in terms of what we're making today. This one was a book I published in 2014 about all the Berlin breweries. It was the first one where you really had all the Berlin breweries in one book. And 4 years later, I made a follow-up. Maybe you still get that in some old bookstores or something, because there are watches in it for all the breweries, which are still valid. So you can get a lot of beers for that if you want. Okay, let's get back to here. Yeah, and also I'm the president of the German Beer Consumers Union, so from Germany. And for all the people who didn't mute their microphone, please do so. If you are from Germany, if you want to join a beer consumers organization, then the GBCU is your organization. Brett already showed you what we are doing, so we're taking care of all the most important things for us about beer and for the breweries about existing and continuing their job and their history. Yeah, also I'm a beer judge at many competitions. So I was just in Belgium, for example, for the Russell's Beer Challenge, or at the European Beer Star or the World Beer Cup. And of course, their knowledge about beer styles is quite an important thing. And also, I'm a speaker. So now let's dive into the Berliner Weisse. And this is, of course, a nice AI picture. You know, we can do a lot of things today now with AI, and this is a fun part I like to do. And we want to talk about how the people and the beer started in the Berlin area. Of course, in this time there was not a Brandenburg Gate, and and they didn't make the beer like this, but I think it looks nice. Let's start. So the first settlements, if you look, how did people come into the area and when, and how did they start to brew? So what we know is that the knowledge of brewing, so how to make a drink out of grain with fermentation, that spread from Africa, Asia, the Near East, to the southeast of Europe, and then it came more and more into Central Europe, and around 5500 before Christ, it was in the German area. It also came, for example, to Spain or later to England, the British Isles, but at this time, people knew how to brew in some way at this time. But there was no settlement at this time. So when we look, when people started to really build their tents or houses or however you call it in this time, this was maybe in about 2500. Then we know the Berlin area was settled. Interestingly, we know it because there was an excavation in the 1930s where they wanted to look for the Berlin history, and then they found these very, very old remnants in a part of Berlin which is called Britz. It's in the southwest. Quite an interesting thing. And what they found, you see it on the right side, was pottery, parts of pottery. And in the pottery, they had remnants of grain. And if you looked closer to it, it was fermented grain, and there was also yeast. So what you see here, the yeast cell, it's also a very, very old one from these times. And then they looked how was the beer produced, and they really found similarities to what the Egyptians did. So there was beer bread made, and then they made a beer out of these beer breads. The only difference was that in Egypt, this was in an industrial scale. So we know, for example, in the city of Abydos, a bit south of Cairo, they had a brewery in this time which produced about 40,000 hectoliters of beer a year, which is in modern times still quite a big brewery. And these people here in Berlin, they only produced for their personal consumption. And that's also the difference. The Egyptians made the beer as a sacrifice for the gods. The Germans just drank it. So maybe that's also an interesting difference. If we speed up a bit, we come to the Roman times. We have Tacitus, the historian from the Romans, and he wrote in his Germania, in the history of Germania, that he found a drink, and he wrote, they drink a juice that is made from barley or wheat and fermented in a similar way to wine. And this is interesting in two ideas, because we have the mentioning of barley and wheat, so both of the grains, and we have the similarity to wine, which is also interesting and will also show up later again. So there was always a link to that, and it was also shown a bit or seen like this. If we again go forward a little bit into the Middle Ages, we have to see when Berlin as a city started. And what we know is in the 6th century, there were Slavic first settlements in this area. And then we have all the documents from this old time. And the first one mentioning cities there was in 1237 and 1244. Now you maybe will think, okay, why he does write Köln here, and why does he mention it? It's because this is the closed area. This is the river Spree, which goes through Berlin. And on the right bank was a settlement, and this settlement was called Berlin. And on the left bank, there was another settlement, and this settlement was called Cologne. So why Cologne? Because it was from the Roman language, colonia meant nothing else than settlement. So also the modern city of Cologne, which you all know because of Kölsch, also has the history in this word. And so this was a settlement named in the Roman way, so Colonia, Köln. And later on, these two cities came together. They had a common town hall, so it was one city. But still, if you go today to Berlin, you have still a part of it called Neukölln, so the New Cologne, and you still find that in the city area. So originally, it was two cities. On the one side of the river, it was Berlin, and on the other, it was Cologne. And also the name Berlin It's also interesting because this is a Slavic name, probably, and the Slavic name means swamp. And the original Slavic word is, like you see on the bottom left here, Berlo or Berlo. And today we have a brewery called that way. And on their coaster, which you see here, they write, "Don't worry, not even Berliners can pronounce it." So not so easy, but you have a look. This is how it looks like. So if you come to today Berlin, you can visit this brewery. They also make a Berliner Weisse. I wouldn't say in the perfect way, but it's a nice beer. So you can go there and have a wonderful time. And what it's really most interesting is it's all built in containers, because when they started, they thought, okay, we have to move in 1 or 2 years. That was about 10 years ago. And you know, Germany today, we get very lazy. So they are still there and they still don't know when they have to go. So, but it's all mobile. So if you want, they could move the brewery tomorrow to another place. So very, very interesting. If you have time, go there. Okay, this is about Berlo, so the original name of Berlin. And how did it start with the brewing there? That's also a big question. What we know is that there was a big forest in this area. And what they first did is that they chopped down all the trees and sold the wood to the British. It went through Hamburg because the big Hanse trading area, trading association, and they sold the beer further on to England. They built a lot of ships, and so the wood was very, very worthy, and that's what they did. But then they found, okay, after we chopped down all the trees, the soil is very fertile. It's perfect for growing crops there, and so they started growing grain. And that we know because we have still like bills or invoices from the very, very old time, from the beginning. So they exported rye to Hamburg in 1288. So very early surplus of grain, which is important for making beer. And also monks came, as you see on this another nice AI picture. They came there, and you know, monks always had the knowledge of brewing. They brought it with them. And also a lot of craftsmen came to these two cities. They got more and more important and were the center of the area very quickly. And so the people came, the craftsmen came, and they brewed beer. What we definitely know, at the end of the 13th century, there were breweries. And a little later, we know from also um, paperworks from the city that they very early made also laws on beer. And this is one of the oldest, it's from 1370. And so they said, okay, no one may be allowed to produce malt or to brew or sell beer if they do not have a citizenship. So what we know out of this is, first, they brewed beer and they made malt, and you only were allowed to do it if you were a citizen. So very important. There were a lot of more rules on it. So, but we know there was professional brewing in this area, and also they quickly formed a brewers guild. So it's also interesting that they had representatives for the brewers, and it was 12 members. 6 of them were brewmasters for 1 year, and then the other 6 came turned on, and then they voted again. So it was a continuous change, 6 and 6 and 6, and they represented the brewers in the city and the council. And also, still only citizens were allowed to brew, and they had to have a proper house. And also, it was interesting, it was only the, let's say, Germanic citizens. They had houses, and the Slavic citizens had a different word for their housings, and they were not allowed to brew. Yeah. And the brewing was only allowed every fortnight, so in 2 weeks once they were allowed to brew. The only exception was about 6 weeks before Easter. Until Easter, they could brew more often because there were a lot of holidays and occasions where you needed beer, so they brewed more often. The brewing outside the city was banned, so all the people also from the surroundings had to drink or to buy the Berlin beer, and they introduced a tax on beer, which is also important because now it's also money that comes from the beer, and also they started recording more, so we know more about it. So now we know Berlin, we know when it was settled, we know when they started brewing. What we don't know is how it came to Berliner Weisse. our beer style from today. And the most important part of it is wheat or Weisse, because in German it's nowadays something the same if you say a Weissbier or Weizenbier, but originally this means two different things. So I had a look, okay, when did what of those start? And what we know is that wheat beers started around the end of the 14th century. Why is this important? Because wheat always was a grain for bread. And you could only brew beer with it if you had so much wheat that you had enough bread to eat and still had wheat left. So only a few areas in whole Europe were suitable for the development of wheat beer styles. One was the Rhine Delta, which is today the Netherlands, because that's why we have there these wheat-based beers. And the other area was the Danubian River to around Munich, north of Munich. That's why we have this Bavarian wheat beer. And the rest normally didn't have enough wheat. So only where you had a trade surplus or other reasons with enough wheat, then you could brew a wheat beer. And this started at the end of the 14th century. Later they were called white beers. And what we know is that white beer meant you had to have the majority of the used grain to be wheat. So not 100%, but more than 50%. And that started as a mention, as a topic in the 16th century. So I just have a sip. The other beers were called red beers or brown beers, and they were made with barley, and then developed the other beer styles we know with that. The sourness is also an important part. I was mentioning in the Roman times, they said it was like wine. And the same words were used also still in the more modern times than in the Middle Ages. They said the beer had a winous character, so they knew about the acidity. But it was not that the brewers said, I want to make a sour beer. So they made their normal beer, but it turned sour very, very quickly. So that was the problem in general in these days. Beers didn't last very long. And so the sourness came quite quickly, but it didn't get too high in these wheat beers. So it was similar to that of white wine. And this was something which they perceived in this time as a normal acidity for a drink. So it was nothing special. So nowadays we say it's a sour beer, but in this time it was a beer. So this is a totally different thing. Other beers we know with the term white had been in Goslar, the Gose, where you see the bottle to the right, and the Bräuhain in Hanover, for example. So if you also talk about historic beer styles, you will find the term white beer more often. What is interesting about Gose, I found a nice quote, and they wrote, the Gose is a good beer. But if you drink it in your stomach, but if you think it's in your stomach, it's in your pants. I hope you understand, because I did the direct translation from German into English, but this is something that seems to happen quite often to Gose drinkers. You can try it yourself if you ever come to Goslar or Leipzig. So now we are into the Berliner Weisse, because now we know about Berlin, we know about white beer, and see how this beer style was born. And what you see to the right is quite an important part of the history we will talk about in a moment. First, we have to think we have been in the Middle Ages at the moment. Berlin had been a quite big city, but then the 30 Years' War came and the years of the plague came. So the population went down from 30,000 to less than 6,000. So really a big loss in a few years. And they had, of course, economic trouble, but also a lot of other problems. And of course, only a few people means a few production, few income, and so on. So a big problem. And the question was what to do. The good thing is they found a new leader, or they got a new leader with the new Duke of Prussia, Friedrich der Große, the Great. And he turned the country, which was after the long war, after the plague.
Ja, hallihallo.
Oh,
Dachte
sorry.
schon, ich erreiche
Britta,
meine
please
ganze.
mute yourself. Or could someone,
Oh,
someone mute
okay.
Britta?
Ja, ich habe gesehen.
So, I did it. So, all right. It's good to be an admin sometimes. All right, so we were talking about what happened to Prussia. So they were down because of the wars and because of the plague. And then the new Duke, he said, okay, I have to do something. And the best thing he could do was to marry someone rich. And that was what he did. He found a Dutch princess, and she had a lot of money and brought also a lot of people into the country. So they had a lot of immigrants from the Netherlands, and they knew a lot of craftsmanship. And of course, they brought trade and they brought money again. And that was like a Kickstarter for the region. So it got better and better. And what was also good for them, the French kicked out the Huguenots, and the Prussian Duke said, okay, you can come to my country. He invited them, and a big part of them came to Prussia. So it was more than 20,000 Huguenots that came from France and also brought their craftsmanship with them. And it was not only knitting and other good things, it was also knowledge about beer. So this was something. We had more inhabitants, a bigger population, more money, much more money, and also a lot of people from more modern, more industrialized or modern regions with a lot of knowledge. And so the whole city of Berlin got into like a boom time, and that also came with a beer. And maybe you already saw this picture. This is also, again, of course, AI based, because there was no Brandenburg Gate and especially no TV tower in this time. But when Napoleon later came to Berlin, it is said that he said about the Berliner Weisse, the white beer, it's the champagne of the north. So we don't know if it was like a joke or if it was really admiration, but it is something that is still there. And if you have the beer, I think you will maybe say okay. And what we know is that some of the today Berliner Weisse is also produced with champagne yeast, so that maybe comes to this. Okay, so let's continue. As the name Berliner Weisse, it started with the Huguenots. They could start a brewery very easily, so they didn't have to make a license or something. They just could start, and they made a beer similar to the Hanover beer, the Brauerei beer. It was a wheat ale, and that was then later called Weisse, and it also got a separate taxation. So this is maybe like the most important point, because if you tax a beer separately from another beer, then you really have something like a beer style. So the wheat beer was taxed much higher than the red beer, and that means, of course, they thought it was a better beer. That's also interesting, that we now have also an idea of quality. And that led to another rise, and we know that in 1770, Berlin had about 289 breweries. So very interesting. And to the right, you see a beer glass from this time. I will just stop the screen sharing because I have one here. So it's a little bit younger. It's from the early 19th century, but this is how it looked like. Yeah, now you see it. So it was quite big. They called it Klauenglas, so claw glass. And what they did is that they filled it with beer, about half of that, and then it was passed through all the people, and they shared this. So very interesting. And I have also found a real picture, not an AI version. One moment. Where you can see this. It's a beer garden in 1878. And here you see one of these glasses standing on the table, and the waiter carrying a lot of them, and another one cleaning them. So very interesting shape of glasses in these times. We will come to the glasses in a moment. So if we look a little bit to the numbers, we know now that we have Berliner Weisse, and let's talk about the number of breweries. We know in the 18th century, we had about 30 white beer breweries with 300 breweries in total. And then it came to the heydays in the early 19th century. So we had about 50 white beer breweries. They produced more than 1 million hectoliters, which is a lot in that time. It was more than 700 pubs serving wheat beer in Berlin. So really great days. That went down more and more because then the lager beer, the Bavarian bottom fermented beer, came into Berlin, and more or less the white beer started to vanish, which continued in the 20th century. We had the two wars, and so it was lower and lower, and then it was almost gone. And nowadays, in the 21st century, we have 2 white beer breweries left. Real ones, I would say. We can talk with Ulrike in a moment, but that's my personal opinion. Yeah, let's see just a little inside one of these breweries, the Landré Brewery here. It's a picture from 1913. So you see, if you look at the people, how proud they are. We have the typical glass of Berliner Weisse, which is then later here in the center, and you see all the brewers and the people driving the horses, and also some beer here. So quite a nice picture to see. This was really a family-run business. So let's look what were the versions of Berliner Weisse in these days. And we have one that was called Boutique Weisse. Boutique means a small shop or a little store. So this was the easygoing thing. Sometimes they even diluted it with water, so it was quite a low alcohol beer. Maybe we would say today this is the normal Berliner Weisse. Then they had the Vollweisse, which meant with a normal strength. What we would say today, it's for normal beer, so it was also stronger. And then, of course, we have stronger, really strong versions, Doppelweisse, which means like a bock beer version or strong beer version of that. And then we have 2 interesting things, the Sandweisse, which means that the bottles for the beer were buried in the sand and then dug out maybe months or even years later if someone had enough money to pay for that. And it was always a big show when this beer was dug out and brought to the people. They ordered it. It was always very. You showed your people where you were drinking with them. You showed them how you appreciate them because you ordered this very expensive beer to share with them. So this was really a special thing. Little bit the same was the Weisse vom Brett, which means the wheat from the shelf. And that means that were bottles which were standing on this shelf up to 11 years. And then you also ordered these very old beers. And so that means it was from the beginning on a beer which was also meant to age, which is very interesting. And maybe the last thing is the Weisse with Strippe. Strippe means a liquor, caraway liquor, which you could mix with a beer, and that was also something it was quite normal in Berlin in this time. So a little quick overview in the glasses. So you already saw this one in my hand and on the picture we just had. Then we have these chalices. I have one of them here. I will show you also in a moment. Exactly this, to be honest. And also they had Stange glass like this. So were different, quite a variety. But the more open ones were the normal ones. So let's get a little bit into the production. Let's see, we are a little bit late in time, but I will try not to hurry and to say the most important things. So what we know is before 1830, definitely there was a low hop dosage, so not much bitterness and not much hop in the beer. Also, what we know today is if you use too much hop, so like 5-6 bitter units, it will inhibit the lactobacillus to work. So it's very important to have a low hop dosage. And it was about half wheat and half barley malt. Both normally malt. Sometimes they use raw wheat. Later on, we know more because we have more papers. We know that they used about 2/3 of wheat and 1/3 of barley, sometimes a little oat. And they had at this time then like a stable mixture of microorganisms and yeast, which came into the beer. And how did it come into the beer? It was because they used wooden vessels and wooden stuff like to steer the beer or whatever. So it was all made out of wood, and in the wood, all these bacteria are living. So of course, if you use it always again, then you always give it to the next brew. So this was definitely something in the breweries, and they filled the beer, and then the second fermentation was in the pubs. So a little link to the British real ale story, but maybe someone knows that better than me. So, and later on, they used more short kiln malt. That means the beer got more foam. And the part of wheat was higher, up to 3/4. And they added the hops earlier during mashing and used decoction for the mashing. And directly after the end of the decoction, at about 72 degrees, they cooled down the wort, so there was no boiling. Then they added the microorganisms, what we know today. It's Lactobacillus, Brettanomyces, and some other ones, and ale yeast. And the fermentation, the first one was about 6 days, and then the bottle fermentation was about 2 to 3 weeks. And also interesting, for the bottle fermentation, they added about 12 to 15% of just freshly mashed beer or wort at this time again to bring fermentable sugar in the bottles. Little insight in a brewery of this day. And now we come to the nowadays times. And of course, what you see, we have the time of the beer geeks. And I said to AI that the Berlin Wall should be in the background crumbling down. It was not perfect, but if I tell it to you, maybe you see it. And of course, you see the modern beer drinkers enjoying the beer. And yeah, the story begins with a guy, his name was Andreas Bock. He was a professional hacker who learned to brew Belgium. He attended a conference in Belgium, and they had as a side program, they had a brewing course, and he just said, okay, let's do it. And so he learned how to brew. That was interesting for him. And later on, he started to brew in his own kitchen and thought about Berlin and the Berlin beers. And then he found an old bottle of the Wilner Brewery in Berlin from the early 1980s. And he managed it to reactivate the microorganisms and started to brew Berliner Weisse again. That was around 2013. So it was on a very small scale. He then started also crowdfunding, and a very interesting story, but I have to make it short today. Then the landlord terminated the lease and he had to leave. But he met someone. He met Ulrike Gens. We will have her later on here. And so she was studying at the VLB. She can talk more about this later. She met Andreas and took over his idea and also the microorganisms, also with what she knew. And then she founded the Schneeeule, her business today. And that is now also, there's a salon, a beer pub in Berlin where you can enjoy her wonderful beers and yeah, enjoy the Berlin beer culture in a wonderful way. So we'll have that in a moment with herself. Just a quick overview. These are some of the beers she does. Of course, I love all of them. To be honest, my most favorite is the Hot Ermi, which is a Berliner Weisse with ginger and chili peppers. So very, very spicy. But all the others are wonderful. So if you have the opportunity, try that. So we will talk with her about in a moment. The other guy, so she's one of the two Berlin breweries doing Berliner Weisse in a real way today. The other guy is Oliver Lemke. He, I would say, it was the first German craft brewer. He started in 1999 with his brew house. Today he has 3 breweries, 4 pubs, and he started with Berliner Weisse in 2017, also in cooperation with the VLB, and also did experiments with fruits and wood and spices, and also does a strong version. I have a bottle here I'll show you later with Louise, which is, let's say, like a bock beer version of the beer. Also a very interesting thing. So here you see some of what he does. So, and before we now talk to Ulrike, I will show you a quick look into the Lemke brewery, and then I will hand over or talk with Ulrike. I hope you get the sound. I will start the video. Now you will be in the Lemke brewery. At first you see Oliver Lemke, the founder, and then you see his brewmaster, Bastian.
Berlin hat ja nicht so viele kulinarische Köstlichkeiten, ja, das Eisbein oder die Currywurst, und die Berliner Weisse ist aber dann doch ein Vertreter. Zur Hochzeit gab es in Berlin über 100 Brauereien, die nur Berliner Weisse gemacht haben. Ist mit der Stadt verbandelt als stadttypisches Getränk. Ist leider so ein bisschen in Vergessenheit geraten. Die Großbrauereien haben eigentlich die klassische Berliner Weisse als Mischgärung aufgehört mit der Produktion, und so dass sie eigentlich quasi tot war. Und das ist natürlich schade, weil es Berlin-typisch ist und weil es unfassbar interessant ist. Und jetzt gibt es eben neben uns noch ein paar andere auch, die dieses Thema wiederbeleben im Endeffekt in den letzten 5, 6, 7 Jahren. Die Berliner Weisse ist eine Mischgärung. So, und was wir heute kennen aus der Brauerei, normalerweise, ich habe einen definierten Hefestamm, mit dem vergäre ich meine Würze. Das funktioniert halt nicht, weil ich eine Mischgärung habe. Und wir haben in unserer Forschung festgestellt, dass das vielfach angewendete Prinzip, dass du nacheinander die Organismen verwendest, dass das nicht funktioniert. Das funktioniert alles nur und liefert ein komplexes Geschmackserlebnis, wenn die Mikroorganismen alle miteinander aktiv sind. Also wenn das, was der eine ausscheidet, frisst der andere quasi wieder. So, das heißt, du stehst vor der Herausforderung. Erstmal musst du Mikroorganismen finden, die überhaupt geeignet sind. So, und dann haben wir gesagt, okay, was brauchst du, um das Ziel, den Champagner des Nordens, zu erreichen? Also du brauchst eine Hefe, klar, für Alkoholproduktion und CO2 und viele, viele andere Dinge. So, du brauchst ein Lacto für die Säure, klar, der möglichst dann auch viel Milchsäure macht und wenig Essigsäure. Dann brauchst du ein Brett, weil für Komplexität, Stichwort Pferdedecke, sollte der noch mit drin sein. Und für die Nachgärung haben wir irgendwie noch festgestellt, dass eine Champagnerhefe sehr schön funktioniert. Das Hauptthema ist eben in der Berliner Weisse, welche Mikroorganismen in welcher Kombination. Und Anstellverhältnis kommt dann noch. Ja? Also wenn ich jetzt mich entscheide, was wir herausgefunden haben, dass die nur gemeinsam agieren können, dann muss es nicht notwendigerweise so sein, dass sie alle in der gleichen Zellzahl losgelassen werden auf die Würze. Sondern man muss dann eben schauen, welche Anstellverhältnisse sind ideal. Also es zeigt so ein bisschen die Komplexität des Ganzen. Und funktioniert es bei uns so, dass die drei für die Hauptgärung verantwortlichen Mikroorganismen, die haben wir in 3 kleinen Fermentern, wo sie vor sich hin leben. Daraus zieht man dann, wenn man anstellen möchte, in der Zellzahl oder dem Anstellverhältnis, wie wir es herausgefunden haben, zieht man sich die erforderlichen Mengen und stellt seinen Würze an.
Oh, hallo, willkommen bei Lemke. Hier ist unser Sudhaus, wo wir die Weisse für Amerika produzieren. Hier als erstes wird das Malz gemeischt, das heißt, wir verwandeln Stärke in vergärbare Zucker um. Und wenn das quasi alles erfolgt ist, wird die Maische in den Diameter völlig umgepumpt. Hier haben wir einen Sieb am Boden, wo sämtliche Schalenreste und auch Eiweißstoffe aufgefangen werden und wir die Würze vom Treber trennen. Wo wir dann für ca. 20 Minuten kochen, da wir hier wenig Hopfen dazugeben, bis gar keinen. Die Maische nur quasi einmal kurz abgetötet und dann geht es über den Berliner Weisse hier im Keller. Hier stehen unsere 3 Fermenter, die wir alle 3 Mikroorganismen Sorten rein vergären, um sie dann später den Zutaten der gleichen Menge immer zuzugeben, um eine gleichwertige Qualität zu erhalten. Die Weisse wird hier offen vergoren und nach über 3 Tagen in den Lagerkeller. Machen wir uns eine Himbeerweise, so benutzen wir keinen Mousse und keinen Sirup, sondern benutzen richtige Früchte, die jetzt als Teil schon zu uns kommen. Dadurch haben wir den Vorteil, dass wir eine größere Oberfläche haben und so mehr Farbe und mehr Geschmack ins Bier übergehen. Nach der Gärung werden unsere Weise dann hier in liegenden Tanks geschlaucht, wo sie dann zu Ende gärt, über täglichen pH-Wert und den Vergärungsgrad testen. Im perfekten Moment abzuwarten, wann dann die Kühlung kommt und auch, wann dann abgefüllt wird auf Flasche oder auf Fass. Am besten aber, man kontrolliert das natürlich alles noch sensorisch. Lecker.
So, and here we are. Of course, my first glass is empty. Ulrike, perfect. You already have one. I will put you here in the focus. So, and me too. I hope that works. Perfect. So, and yeah, you already have one. I also have one of yours. So let's open that. I
Oh.
think you are.
Now you hear me also, right?
Oh. Just here.
Perfect. Ah, nice.
Of course, you can ask all your questions in a moment, but first, Ulrike, let's say cheers with your wonderful beer.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Just a minute. A little bit of strippe, huh?
Mm-hmm. You turn on the volume, okay? Perfect. And of course,
Yeah, with strippe, it works better as sour it is.
that's right, yeah. With the
More
mix-
sour, more strippe.
And I did something very bad, maybe because I used a glass of Schultheiss, but I just wanted to also have the old story a little bit because it's an old glass of that brewery. You have the
Yeah.
proper one, of course, for your beers. So perfect. So maybe first of all, it's great that you are here. It's wonderful, and thank you, of course, for what you do for your beers, for all your effort and everything. And maybe you give us a little introduction, maybe what I forgot. And also, I know you did a crowdfunding some months ago. So how is it with your business at the moment? Is it going on, and are you strong? Let us know.
Yeah, Berliner Weisse is still a niche in a niche, yeah, a little bit sourish and also wild, yeah, with Brettanomyces in the craft beer scene, kind of. But it's one of the oldest beer styles, and so this is what I want to keep and save for the next generations also. And yeah, but it's a lot of work, of course. And in the moment, it's a business. Everybody knows it not that good. And also, I want to move the brewery to make it more, yeah, stable, or what should I say? Make it right for the future, because where I worked in the moment, it wasn't that perfect. So two little spaces. I have to move the beer from outside to another room, and also the landlord. It's a little bit strange, and so yeah, but it's really difficult to find a space in Berlin because it's quite expensive. So Berliner Weisse has to be brewed in Berlin, and so it's difficult to find a room with a special characteristic. So you need, of course, a drain and floor and something like this, and has to be from in the ground floor, kind of, yeah, because it's a heavy business, and still not that big, because it should be not that expensive, and it's smaller, it's expensiver. So that's how it is in the moment. So still I'm work on it.
So the best we can do is to drink more of your beers. So
Certainly,
that's
by as
something
much as possible. This is important. So we also export a lot. So because the Berliner themselves are more Scottish, like the Scottish people would say. When they talk with each other, then they talk about the cheapest way to get something, and not about the weather. Yeah, so it's totally different to the Franconian guys, like Markus, by the way. All of these guys talking about the food. So the nicest butchery, or the nicest bakery, or of course brewery. Yeah, and so this is a special what we do. Problem we have in Berlin. So yeah, but still I export a lot in the world, and I hope it gets more. So
yes,
yeah,
we all hope it gets more. And you are also traveling a lot to festivals, and maybe one last question before we just open to questions for all of you. When you travel so much and you have your beer on all these festivals, what are the reactions of the people? So do they immediately like your beer, or do they sometimes look strange, or what is the typical reaction to it?
yeah. Usually, so when I'm in festivals in Germany, they are mostly so. They drink lagers, yeah, lagers, not sour beers, and so they are quite shocked when they drink the first time Berliner Weisse. So, oh, this is not right. I think it's something went wrong with the beer. So, no, it should be like this because it's Berliner Weisse. So, but when I'm in international festivals, they know sour beers, because in the craft beer scene in somewhere else, it's much bigger than in Germany, and so they know Gose, they know kettle sours, they know kettle sours. Yeah, they know Goose also sometimes, and so I don't have to keep to force them to try this. Yeah, sometimes also like in Mexico, the people are used to drink or have sour stuff. Yeah, they have to everything a little bit of lemon. Yeah, so and yeah, also when the weather is hot, then it's much more nice to drink a Berliner Weisse than a strong IPA or so. And so it's different in different areas in the world, but often they like it because it's an easy going drink. Mostly also the brewers like it because it's not that strong. Yeah, they exactly like it because the reason for this reason I start brewing it, because it's not that strong beer and it's easy drinkable, and on the same time it's also well balanced and interesting. And what's also interesting is that the chefs of restaurants like it because it's interesting taste, so similar than wine, but not exactly. And so yeah, they also love it often.
Yes, and there is carbonation, and also
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
one last important thing, because I also said in the presentation, the real Berliner Weisse. So what you normally get internationally is something just kettle sour or lactobacillus, but
Yes.
the most important thing for the real stuff is that you have at least Brettanomyces, but maybe also other microorganisms in the beer, and that also makes it interesting if you age it. So very important topic. We have a question in the chat, for example. If you have your selection, what bottle would you recommend to start with? So what of your beers would be good for someone who wants to start with the beer style? Which one?
Also my beers. Yeah,
From your
definitely.
beers, yeah.
You have to have at first when someone come in my bar, I recommend first Marlene. Of course, we have it from tap, so it's a quite young one. So exactly. So by the way, when it's aged, then it calls Dietrich. So you will find it like with Dietrich. It's the same beer but aged. So because it's named after Marlene Dietrich.
And aged means half a year or a year or how old?
Oh, older than a year. So sometimes you are lucky and you get a 2018, 2017 beer sometimes. Yeah, or just from the last year. Could be, depends on. So and it's I always say it makes it not better, it makes it different, because a young beer is really nice when it's really sour, then it fits perfectly with the caraway liquor, and after 1.5 years gets more adult. Yeah, I call it adult because yeah, it develops. So what you said is the main fermentation needs seven days. I would say the fermentation in a bottle needs till it's drunken. Because it's still alive till 20 years, whatever, when you drink it, right? And that the Brettanomyces inside stays alive and keeps it fresh. So this is the reason you can drink it after 10 years. When the cap is closed, then and the Brettanomyces is still alive, then it's well drinkable. Yeah. Often, for example, if you have a wheat beer, a German wheat beer, yeah, you have the yeast also on the bottom, and when it gets old, so after 7 months maybe latest, yeah, then you have a autolysis of yeast on the bottom, and then that tastes not good. Could happens also in Berliner Weisse, but the Brettanomyces takes all the substances from the dying yeast, Saccharomyces or Lactobacillus, and yeah, take it for life.
Yeah,
for
it
themselves.
turns it into
Like,
other nice aromas. So,
exactly, and you mostly have not that really bad sulfuric taste of autolysis. Of course, could be that it is a point all the Saccharomyces died out, kind of, and the Brettanomyces is not fast enough to eat it. That's possible. When you have 2 bottles of this, keep it for 2 months longer, and then try it again, also with the yeast, and you will see it's not bad anymore.
Yeah, of course. So it's definitely a recommendation also to store some of the beer to age it in your cellar at cellar temperatures with no light,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
wait a year, 2, 3, 4, and just try it
Yeah.
over and over again. So we have a question about the syrup thing. So many people know Berliner Weisse red or green with raspberry syrup or woodruff syrup.
Yeah,
I think this is something that started in the 1920s or so, but maybe you know it better than me. And this is more a touristy thing, of course. But yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons Berliner Weisse is not that common anymore, because they started the beginning of the last century to do it like a lemonade. Yeah, imagine they drank it before all day. Yeah, also the children, also the old people, everybody drank Berliner Weisse. Of course, without syrup, because syrup was sugar, and sugar was quite expensive because it comes with a sailor from Caribbean or Asia somewhere. Yeah, you can imagine there's not that much sugar left when they are in storm. Yeah. And they started 1850 around with cultivation of sugar roots. Yeah, sugar roots. It's the right direction. I'm not sure. And make sugar raffinade also in Europe. And so it gets less expensive, and the Coca-Cola century started. Yeah. And so everybody has to be as sweet as possible. Yeah. And yeah. And then, of course, I meet now a lot of old Berliners that, yes, of course, we know Berliner Weisse because we drank it as children, like a children in the beer gardens. So, but imagine you as a child drink lemonade-like beer in a beer garden. When you get adult, then you don't drink it anymore because this is children's beer. So when you come in my bar, you get it not with syrup. Of course, we have syrup sometimes. Okay, yeah, when they really want it, but usually I recommend it with schnapps, and so we don't sold a whole bottle of syrup in this 4 years the bar exists, and so yeah, it's more for adults. Yeah, with schnapps. So in our days, nobody give children even 3% beers or 2% beers. Yeah. So even pregnant said, "Oh no, we have 0.5% of alcohol. We don't want non-alcohol stuff." In beer, it's written on the label. When you buy apple juice, it's not written on it on the label but it could be that it have more than 0.5% alcohol, or kombucha, for example, is also fermentation, right? Could be they have more alcohol than alcohol-free beer.
Yes, it's an important topic, but a totally different one for today.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
we also talk about that in EBCU a lot, so this could be another reason why to come into one of our consumers organizations to work on that and to talk about that. But
Yeah.
back to Berliner Weisse, so it's really that the syrup version is really a touristy thing. It's from the time, as you said, when the sweet was good and people liked that more sweetened, and but more or less this is crap because you have it artificial aroma, artificial sweetness, and that kills the beer. And also the big brewery nowadays, which makes this Berliner Weisse, the Kindle brewery, they only do it with lactobacillus, and this is made to be drunk with syrup. So this is not a beer you can drink solo.
Exactly.
So if you want the real stuff, you have to go to Ulrike or to Olli. So these are the two places you really can enjoy that in normal. And but you can do your own thing. Try it like this and like that. And but I would always also recommend drink it pure, enjoy it pure, and maybe try what Ulrike does today, the caraway liquor. It's a nice addition, especially
Yeah,
at this time.
always hype on hype. This is bitter orange liquor.
Oh yeah,
Could also,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So just a question to Brett. Do we have 5 more minutes for questions?
For me, yeah.
No,
Why
no,
not?
to you, to Brett, because
Yes,
he's the
yes, of course, no problem, no
Of
problem.
course, no
Brett.
problem.
You
So,
don't meet Berliner Weisse.
No,
if you
right.
have more questions, please write it in the chat. Because with 90 people, I would hesitate to have the open mic. So there was one question about blending. So do you also blend beers?
Of course. At least Berliner Weisse, you described it a little bit. Berliner Weisse is kind of a blend also. All of us know Goose, or maybe not. Goose is a blending of 1 to 3 years old lambic. And in Berliner Weisse could be similar. Not that long, because it was a quite fast and big volume beer in this day. And so you said they added Kreuzen. So this is like a 1 year old lambic. So this is the fresh culture with sugar and makes a carbonization, right? The 3 year old lambic makes a complexity. Yeah, sometimes you find in the literature that they added old beer to this. It wasn't. I would say it wasn't 3 years old. Maybe 1 year, or but older than a month. Yeah, and the main beer is the beer from the main fermentation. So this is a 2nd year old lambic. So when you want to do it in the same stuff, and of course blending is a typical, quite common technique in brewing. Yeah, of course I blend beers. So I blend when I rescue beers. So the old IPAs or old whatever pilsners, then I blend also Berliner Weisse to them, and it makes a good after fermentation. So it makes a different one afterwards, of course.
Perfect. So we have another question from Tom from California. Good morning, Tom. He says when he visited Berlin in 2009, it seems to be a ladies' beer, and women drink it from a goblet. Oh yeah, he also had the syrup versions, and when he ordered it at a bar, the waiter seemed confused, and then he got it straight and the syrup aside. So now it's different because there was a time when they sold the beer from the big brewery already mixed with syrup. But I think these times are gone now too. I'm not sure. But as I said, go for the two real ones. It's really the best idea. And also you can go to Ulrike in her beer salon and meet her in person and talk about the Weisse and try it in all the different versions, which is a wonderful thing. And take your time. So maybe you go there at the early afternoon and then you stay there for the rest of your day. So whatever. So
Yeah,
let's
in the
have a
summer,
look.
it's possible in the early afternoon. In the moment we start in weekends at 5, so it's not that sunny anymore. Then
Yes.
this,
And another question from the brewer, Wolfgang. Hi. Sorry, I misunderstood your first question. In terms of blending, he meant that Oliver Lemke mentioned that he blends the 3 microorganisms like lactobacillus, like Brettanomyces, and the yeast. separately and also at the same time and in different proportions. So what do you think about that? Do you do similar things, or what are your experiences?
I do similar things because we have one problem. We both have one problem. We have no straight and proper mix culture. So not a symbiotic one that needs 10 years around to develop it. And I'm not sure if he works on it, but we had the first trials was so when we just started with all of the microorganisms that they fight each other and they make off flavors on this reason. And so it's a controlled mix fermentation. I would say Lemke also do a controlled mix fermentation in this part. It's important that they work together somehow, and so they can influence the life of the others. So that's yeah, it's definitely not the really old technique, I would say. It's also much more easier when you have a proper mix culture, because just put it inside, let them go, and ready. And so you have to count this, the cells, or you have to see or to taste. Okay, you need more of this. You have to control the single fermentation cultures, stuff like this. It's a lot of work. So what could be easier with a proper mix fermentation culture?
Thank you. And also, Wolfgang, if you have more questions on that, just send me an email, or Ulrike. You find her email on the website of Schneeeule, and then you can go deeper if you need to. So let's have one last question. So if someone has a question, just write it into the chat. Then we will close the meeting. Let's see. Interesting question from Yo. Is it correctly that you add bread as a dry yeast because you do not have a coolship? So maybe before Ulrike answers, there is no direct connection between a coolship and Brettanomyces. So the coolship was a device. Yes, a coolship was a device to cool down the beer, and it never introduced Brettanomyces. Maybe bread was in the brewery or in wooden parts of the brewery later on, but this is not a connection. It was sometimes the beer educators talk about this in that way, but that's wrong. But it's an interesting question if you have bread as a dry yeast, or do you have a liquid strain, or how do you use it?
I'm not a big fan to stress Brettanomyces, because Brettanomyces remember everything. When you dry it, I'm not sure if it starts right working. So, or it needs really long time. I never tried dried yeast. Dried yeast, yeah, Saccharomyces, it's easy, no? But Brettanomyces, no, definitely not. I take it from the bottle. It's a liquid culture in an old bottle. Then it needs time to start working again. And I never dry it. Never.
Okay, perfect. So, one moment. It's a good last question from Ferry.
Okay.
The question is, so many people, especially craft brewers, are nowadays making something they call Berliner Weisse. But as we know now after the workshop, it
they have to
isn't
call
really.
it Berliner Weisse style.
Yes. But if they are from outside Germany, they can, because in Germany it's a regulation. You are only to have able to call it Berliner Weisse if it's brewed in Berlin. So that's why, for example, there's a brewery in Potsdam which has also a nice Weisse, but cannot call it Berliner Weisse. But the question is, what do you think about all these breweries? Do you see it like an insult, or do you see it like an enrichment, or what do you think about all these breweries making something, calling it Berliner Weisse or Berliner style, Weisse style, which it isn't, in fact?
Naja, on the one side, I was happy that they do it because they bring the beer style again to talk about it, and in the head of the people. But of course, it's quite difficult to say then to the end customer, kind of, yeah, that this is not the right style. You have to you can have a special. It's a special brew. You need Brettanomyces that makes a character, at least. Yeah, that makes the fruitiness of the beer. So when you even ever have had a kettle sour, just straight Berliner Weisse with style, without Brettanomyces and without any addings like fruits, stuff like this, because they add more flavor to it. Then it's more so two-dimensional, and so you also can't age it and stuff like this. Yeah, I had also a situation. I sent beer to a judgment to South America, and I get notices back. So it's a nice sour beer, but it's not in style for Berliner Weisse. Of course, this is quite funny for me because I'm sorry, that's maybe the only real Berliner Weisse I ever had. Yeah, and so yeah, often they are also too strong. So in Berliner Weisse, from style wise, it's a low alcohol beer. So yeah, on one side it's not so. It makes more attention to this beer style. On the other side, yeah, wrong ideas, yeah, to enjoy it.
Yes, and I know the situation on a judging
Yeah.
table. I had a lot of discussions when we had in the rules like Berliner Weisse must not contain Brettanomyces, then it's infected, and we had a lot of these discussions. But that's why we are judging and talking to the people, and also why we do these workshops. So thank you very, very much, Ulrike, that you were with us. Thank
Yeah.
all of you, of course, for joining us. And of course, you have our contact data. Ulrike, you find Schneeeule easily if you Google it, and mine the same. And also, you can write me or Ulrike and have your questions. And of course, enjoy these wonderful beers. And that's the best support you can give to us and to her, especially.
Someone come to me in December. So
yeah,
I can imagine with Ron would say.
Thank you, Ulrike. Thank you.
perfect. So, Brett, I hand over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Ulrike. Fantastic
Thank you.
webinar and much appreciated. I'm sorry my name causes so much confusion on this sort of workshop. It always does, but there you go. I wasn't named after the type of yeast. It's just a coincidence. But what I would say is if you, we had a record number of attendees tonight. We had we nearly hit we did hit the 100 limit. But for anyone who was unable to join until later, the workshop will be made available on YouTube by the usual ways. If you're not a member of our mailing list, please sign up. Don't miss the next and forthcoming workshops, which I already mentioned, is on December the 9th. I'm looking at Marcus. That sounds
Oh,
right.
I'm not sure. I will be in Poland judging beer this time, but I will do it from the hotel. So,
Okay, so this is the Christmas beer
Yeah.
celebration. So thanks everyone, and have a good evening, and thanks for everyone for coming. Cheers, bye. Cheers.
bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.